Welcome to another week, another show of Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. Momentarily, you'll see our good buddy Sean Bock joining us on screen. Sean, of course, as you know, joined us throughout this 6-year run on television throughout the state of Iowa and surrounding states. Sean, of course, as you know, is the recruiting expert and beat writer covering the Iowa Hawkeyes for CBS Sports 24/7 Sports. Sean, my friend, as always, thanks for agreeing to join us for the whole show. We're going to talk Hawkeye men's basketball, then Hawkeye women's basketball, and talk a little football for the Hawkeyes going into the NFL Combine, getting ready for pro days, upcoming season recruiting, everything all in a nice, neat basket. Sean, my friend, great to see you again, and thanks for joining us. How you doing, my friend?
Good, Dave. Yeah, thank you for having me. A lot to talk about the league from the last couple of weeks, and obviously the last week or so, or the last couple of days too. So ready to dive into it.
The Maryland loss at Maryland after they drubbed them in the first meeting at Carver Hawkeye was big. But this one on Saturday, this might be an owie bigger than we can imagine because Ohio State upsets Purdue at Ohio State. And Ohio State's last two games are going to be far easier than the Hawkeyes. Hawkeyes right now overall at 20-9, but 10-8 in the Big Ten. Sean, they're tied for eighth with Ohio State right now currently and have the tiebreaker, but Ohio State has a far easier road to hoe the next two games to close out the regular season before the Big Ten tourney. Hawks play at home against Michigan, top five ranked Michigan, and then they go on the road to face Nebraska. So that Michigan game will have already been played by the time most people see this show on Thursday. And then Sunday, they close out the regular season at Nebraska. And you know, Nebraska is going to want to have something for Iowa after getting beat at Carver Hawkeye. So, Sean, I gave you a big setup here. Fire away when ready, please.
Yeah, that was definitely one that, stings. I mean, you look at Iowa's losses on the road, and they've kind of been the ones at least that where they've played against teams where, they've lost those games on the road. And that's obviously been a struggle for them, kind of finding ways to win on the road outside of playing on the Pacific Northwest, which is kind of a weird thing because, the Pacific Northwest or even the West Coast kind of gets the narrative of like it's pretty hard to win there. Maybe that's more of a football thing, but still, like it's when you go over those two time zones, it's definitely an adjustment. And Iowa was able to get it done there, but they go on the road to these games against lesser opponents. Minnesota, I think, is still a pretty good team. Has just been banged up. Maryland's been playing better basketball as of late, but obviously Iowa took care of business to them back in December at home pretty handily, even with Pharrell Payne. And then you lose to Penn State, and yeah, it's just kind of the common denominator in a lot of Iowa's losses this year in the Big Ten are, they have issues defending quicker guards, keeping those guys in front of them, and now it's like one of those things too. It's kind of just been struggles from defending the 3-point line. I mean, they're able to contain Bruce Thornton, able to really contain Ohio State, and then Ohio State goes back home and takes down Purdue. And it's just like, man, you got to be able to take care of business and beat some of these inferior opponents and not play down to the level of competition. And that's one of the areas that, we maybe saw as a strength for this Iowa team at the beginning of the year, considering what they were doing to some of these, low major, mid major teams. And that's kind of what Iowa's resume has been built on from a metric standpoint. I mean, they've really dominated some of these quad four games and, have picked up some pretty big road wins, like we mentioned, Washington, Oregon. I know those teams aren't that good. Indiana's right there in the bubble. Then obviously they have the Nebraska game too, but they have to take care of business in these games where they need to win or they need to, avoid the loss, if anything. Like obviously a win doesn't help you too much, but a loss can really, mess with you. And just kind of the way that game went down too, like everything that I wrote pregame, kind of that Iowa needed to do, like that's kind of where Penn State was able to, attack them. And one of the things was keeping Penn State's guards off the bounce. I mean, I thought they did an okay job of that here and there, but they were still able to, get into the gaps and whatnot and, get those kickouts. And Penn State has some streaky shooters too. And, they were able to knock down a couple of shots. Josh Reed was pretty good. I mean, he kind of took that mismatch of Cooper Koch and, really went to work on him. And then, they had a couple, I think they were 9 of 15 from three. And that's kind of been a theme for Penn State. Like they're not a good 3-point shooting team, but the way that they were able to stay in some of these games were, knocking down the three and putting together some efficient offenses. And you think after that Ohio State game too, and the way that Iowa played defensively, that they could really build off of that. But no, like they just were not able to do that, string enough together stops on the defensive end. Like I said, they have some issues with going up against quicker guards Josh Reed was obviously a big factor in this game too, was really good for Penn State. He's been one of the more consistent scorers in the Big Ten. And yeah, it's like, and another thing too, like the offense kind of just goes stagnant towards the end of the games. It almost feels like they become a little bit too reliant on Bennett Sturts. And Penn State also did a really good job of kind of, containing Iowa and ball screens. And that's one of their big strengths on the offensive end of the court. And, it just kind of really felt like it, last point too, like they just kind of let them stay along or stay in the game for too long. I thought that was one thing that really, hurt them too, is they had leads of 7, and I think 5 or 6 throughout the second half, and they weren't able to, put the foot on the gas and just kind of, break the game open and impose their will like they were able to do against Ohio State. And, that's been an issue in some games too this year. I know USC had that comeback against Iowa early in there. Iowa was able to come back. UCLA had it too. There are a few other games that come to mind where, Iowa kind of just goes stall mode, and it's kind of just like, man, we got to figure something out offensively. Or we got to, as a staff, we got to figure something out and, find a way to, maybe go away from just kind of relying on Bennett down the stretch to, carry the load. And, Iowa just wasn't able to get that, and Penn State was able to find their footing towards the end.
Sean, you got to get out and play perimeter defense, especially against these last 2 regular season opponents. And of course, the word is out in the scout. Hawks are lacking perimeter defense. Got to get ready for that Big Ten tournament too, Sean.
Yeah, yeah, and Michigan. I mean, we saw what Michigan did this past weekend against Illinois. Their positional size is going to give Iowa a lot of issues. Yaxel Lendenberg, just does so many things well on both ends of the floor and was really able to contain Keaton Wagler. I know Wagler had like 20 points or something like that, but he had to work for all 20 of those. And, 6'9" and kind of built like a linebacker, maybe even a defensive end kind of with his length. Like Lendenberg might get the assignment on Bennett Sturts. And, that's something that Bennett has really had issues with, his guard, going up against those guys with length and, physicality, and can be really, tough for him at the point of attack. And, they're going to try and do everything in their power to slow him down. But yeah, I mean, you have these 2 chances coming up to definitely get that signature win. I mean, I think Iowa's still in a pretty good spot in the NCAA tournament right now. But man, like, if you get that 9th seed, it's a little bit more of an interesting scenario, because right now, if you look at the projected conference tournament, if I was the 9th seed, obviously they only get the single bye. They'll play the winner of Maryland and Oregon. And we know with Maryland, Iowa went to Maryland, lost. Oregon has Nate Biddle back. And I'm not saying, they're a great team, but Nate Biddle obviously adds a little bit more of a tougher dynamic for this Iowa team with his size and skill at 7 foot at the 5 spot. And, that's also an opportunity. That's a quad 3 game. Like, that's not really going to be a game that, you can afford to lose. So you're just kind of in a really tough situation right now. And then you play Ohio State potentially, assuming that they get that 8th seed. So Iowa would definitely like to have a little bit of help down the stretch. I mean, you mentioned that the Buckeyes play Penn State on the road, I think it is. Or it's Penn State at home, or is it on the road? I can't remember exactly which one. But then they play Indiana.
Penn State on the road and Indiana at Ohio State at home. You are correct.
Okay, so I mean, you're hoping for a little bit of a slip up from this Ohio State team, because they obviously have been so up and down. And Indiana's obviously desperate too, and Penn State's playing like they got nothing to lose. So, even though Penn State took you down, you got to be their biggest fan too coming up too, because you don't really. I think you really want to avoid that 9th spot. I think Iowa can definitely take down, Maryland or Oregon, but it's one of those games where it's almost like I said before, it's almost more of a can't lose than a must win. And Iowa's still in a pretty good spot right now for the tournament. Right now, they're probably on that 8 or 9 seed line, probably more solid as an 8, maybe, inching more towards the 9 seed line. And, if you lose out, it doesn't really hurt you too much, but, you want to be on the safer side of this bubble for sure. I think, they should be able to put themselves in a solid spot, but yeah, like the next few games are going to be really interesting. That Big Ten draw is going to be really fascinating too.
Said is Sean Bock, beat writer covering the Iowa Hawkeyes for 27 Sports, CBS Sports, also their recruiting expert. I'm Dave O'Hara with Hawkeye. We'll be back with more in just a few moments.
Hawkeye is brought to you by BettorEdge, your ultimate social betting marketplace. With no VIG, you're bound to win more on every bet on BettorEdge. Founded by Hawkeye alum James Siles and proud Iowan Greg Kajewski, BettorEdge delivers an unmatched betting experience. Plus, what's not to love when they're committed to supporting charities and children's hospitals near you? Join the action now. Sign up at bettoredge.com/Hawkeyed and get $10 to start winning more today. BettorEdge, where your social betting means your bets go further and you win more.
Welcome back to Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. You'll see momentarily our buddy Sean Bock. Sean is going to join us for the whole show today. He is beat writer covering Iowa Hawkeyes athletics for 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports, and also the recruiting expert. Sean and I talked Hawkeye men's basketball in the first segment. Let's get to Hawkeye women's basketball. Sean, they are 24-5 overall, finished their regular season at 15-3 in the Big Ten. Will be the number 2 seed in the Big Ten tournament.
The bounce back went as well as you probably could have, anticipated or wanted it to. I mean, obviously after that Minnesota game, I think a lot of people were very worried about where this season was going to go. Not necessarily had Jensen lost the team, but I mean, that's a really tough stretch. And, just kind of the way they lost those games too, you're kind of like, oh boy, like there was just didn't seem like there was any real, strong cohesion with this group or like just kind of seeing things off. And obviously losing someone like Taylor McCabe, that is huge for like just kind of the whole, I guess, morale of the group and just kind of the chemistry of everyone because she is a big role player in that spot. And, Taylor Strumrose have really stepped up and, impressed her game and has really taken her game to a new level. Ava Hyden's been really fantastic too. I mean, that's kind of been a common theme throughout the years, throughout the year, but defensively, like that has just been what this Iowa team has been the catalyst for. I mean, their offense has obviously been, strong. They've had some really good showings, but defensively, I mean, in 5 of the last 6 games, they held their opponents to under 1 point per possession, with the only game just being the Illinois game where they allowed Illinois to score 1.1 points per possession. But every other game, they kept their opponents to under a point per possession. That's a really, impressive thing to do and something that this team needs to continue to hold their hat on because, yes, offensively, I think they do have some pieces, but, obviously they're not as, much of an offensive catalyst or firepower team as they were the last couple of years or, throughout the Caitlin Clark tenure. So to see them step it up defensively and, really take on, that kind of, mindset was really, really good for this team, I think, too, because you look at that 3-game losing streak that they had, they allowed over 1 point per possession in both those games, with that Minnesota game being 1.29 points per possession. So to see them, really kind of hang their hat on the defensive end and, really put together strong performances on that end of the floor, that's ultimately probably what's going to be able to really carry them, potentially to a long run in March. And, that Big Ten tournament, that Big Ten tournament draw, I think too, I mean, Illinois, like I bet they're gonna try and do whatever they can to get back to Iowa. Because it's Wisconsin versus Illinois in the first game. Then you got Michigan State would be the second game. So it'd be either Wisconsin, Illinois against Michigan State. Michigan State's obviously a good team too, with the talent that they have and the experience scores. And if Illinois, Illinois is an extremely dangerous number 10 seed in the Big Ten tournament. That will be something to watch. But if Iowa can ultimately get to the semifinal, I mean, they probably should still be sitting pretty good at that, maybe 2 seed line because there was talk of them potentially not hosting a first regional or first round of 64, round of 32. So to see them, kind of secure themselves in that spot is a good thing for sure because that gives you more confidence, heading into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. As the number 2 seed, they are buys all the way through Friday's game. And again, by the time this show airs, that game will have already been played, and hopefully the Hawks are into the semifinal already. The interesting thing to your point, yeah, Illinois is going to want to play to get to Iowa again because they lost a close one last week at Carver Hawkeye to the Hawkeye women, and they won it down the stretch with some big free throws. And that Hannah Stuelke injury, I know she's getting a break now. Didn't play against Wisconsin yesterday as we record this on Monday afternoon, March 2nd. But it's interesting because that's kind of cropped up a few games where Hannah's missed, games that the Hawks figured they would probably win and win handily, and they did and have. So Hannah did get a break to get healthy, so she'll be off until Friday's game. Hopefully that shoulder injury can heal up and she can get a little bit more closer to 100%. But as you mentioned, with Taylor Stremlo stepping in for Taylor McCabe in that starting lineup, they are at 12-0 when in games that Taylor Stremlo starts. So she's almost been getting doubles every game with points and assists, and she'll chip in with a handful of rebounds here and there too. So she has really taken over that guard spot, and then you can let Kylie Fearback do what she does, the defensive stalwart. Of course, Chit Chat Wright has really picked her game up from the outside, shooting threes and really scoring well. And then, Sean, it starts and stops with talking about Ava Hayden. That young lady has become basically a 2010 almost automatic pencil it in. Coming off the Big Ten Player of the Week back-to-back, National Player of the Week last week. She is really something else. So, and then you bring in Layla Hayes, the 6'5 freshman off the bench. Journey Houston, what a game she's been having now that she's been in the starting lineup when Hannah Stolke doesn't start. So they've got some freshmen and sophomores, Sean, as I mentioned earlier, that have really, once they got in the lineup, they're not looking back. And Addie Deal has become more and more consistent, and she's getting limited minutes off the bench, but key times. So, Sean, all in all, this team seems to be rounding into very good tournament shape.
The way they've been able to bounce back, I mean, that was, if you would have asked anyone, how ideally of a bounce back it would be, I think, during that 6-game stretch, I think a lot of people would have taken potentially 4-2. Or 5-1, obviously. But, the way they were able to do it, I mean, taking care of business against Michigan, having their best defensive performance of the year, holding Michigan, who is a pretty good offensive team, to 0.624 points per possession. Like, that is elite. Like, that might be one of the best defensive performances in women's college basketball this season, with the way that they were able to, really hunker down on that side of the floor. And yeah, I mean, just setting themselves up well nicely. I mean, like I said, they don't necessarily have the elite offensive, firepower that, they have had in the last couple of years. But anytime you got someone like Ava Hayden who can take over games, and if Taylor Shermo is playing the way that she's capable of, and, Hannah Stolke can be, consistent Hannah Stolke, that's a really big bonus for this team.
Folks, he is Sean Bock, beat writer covering the Iowa Hawkeyes for 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports, also their recruiting expert. I'm Dave O'Hara with Hawkeye. We'll be back with more in just a few moments.
If you want to go faster this spring to capture that additional yield, protect your seed when you're planting early. Here's Lynn Williams, our General Sales Manager.
There's no doubt that planting early increases yield potential, but there is risk. With Merschman Seed Starting Line and Starting Line Plus seed treatments, we are managing those risks. Combine that with soybean varieties with proven defensive packages, and you're going to see higher yield potential across all your acres.
Contact your local Merschman Seed dealer today and find out about Starting Line and Starting Line Plus soybean seed treatments. From Merschman Seeds, your friend in the field.
Welcome back to Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. Momentarily, you'll see our good buddy Sean Bock joining us. Sean is kind enough to join us throughout this whole show. First segment, we talked Hawkeye men's basketball. Second segment, Hawkeye women's basketball. This third and final segment, kind of a potpourri, a multitude of topics to cover. In the NFL Combine this last week, Jennings Dunker won the internet, of course, with his red flow, his red mane, his mullet. That made the internet, in his 40-yard dash. Hair all over it, and he gave great interviews when they asked about why didn't you enter the transfer portal, and he said if you played for Kirk Ferentz and played at Iowa, you wouldn't even consider it either. And just a lot of great personality showing. Of course, we all know that here in Iowa about Jennings Dunker. But then Logan Jones sets the best time in the 40 for offensive linemen at 4.9. And to see that big 300-pounder in the Outland Trophy winner this last season, to see him rumbling down the 40-yard dash path, quite impressive. But that's not to overstate what Bo Stevens did, what Xavier Wampa did, what Weegan did. And it's going to be interesting, Sean, that pro day upcoming in Iowa City here soon. The scouts, as usual, are impressed with the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, no, and Iowa does a really good job, obviously, of preparing their players for the NFL and for the next level, and they do a really good job of getting these guys to work in some of these testing settings and be able to really execute it, because there is a method and kind of different forms that you got to have to be really successful with the 40-yard dash, and obviously the vertical leap and then the shuttle run too. So it's good to see, not a surprise that these Iowa guys were able to perform at the level that they did, and really surprised. And then all in the interviews too. I mean, all the guys that were invited to the combine too are very personable guys, very likable guys, and can get along with anyone pretty well too. So it's still disappointing that Mark Gronowski wasn't invited, because I think he would have been able to really show out kind of his personality, and then obviously maybe see him throw a bit, but kind of to see what he did at that East-West Shrine Bowl, I thought was really good for him too, because he really kind of took his stock up as kind of that, utility quarterback kind of guy. Or, I don't know if he's a starter in the NFL, but I think he could really be, a guy that, can help boost your room and, kind of, really thrive as maybe a backup or one of our reserve quarterbacks. And maybe, being able to step in here and there, in that spot too.
Looks to be the race between Hank Brown and Jeremy Hecklinski at quarterback. A lot of questions. Dolph says, the George Barnett and crew are excited with the offensive line. Yeah, you lose three key pieces in the aforementioned Logan Jones, Jennings Dunker, and Bo Stevens. But a lot of great talent coming back with Pieper and some redshirt freshmen that are ready to develop. On the defensive side, you lost some key figures. But again, that linebacker room, underclassmen, and the rest of that defense, guys are ready to step up and make their mark. This is going to be an interesting spring, isn't it, Sean?
Yeah, it's probably one of the more interesting springs for Iowa football in the last couple of years. I mean, this is the first time that there's probably been a true quarterback battle in over a decade. Because it kind of always felt like leading into the season that, Iowa kind of had their guy. Nate Stanley was next in line behind CJ Beathard. Spencer Petras was next in line behind Nate Stanley. Then you had Cade McNamara. And then obviously, Mark Gronowski this year. And now it's kind of like, well, who is next? Like, because I think a lot of people would have said Jeremy Hecklinski, and I still think that's kind of the case, or that's kind of where things are leading right now. But Hank Brown has been able to come on pretty nicely over the last couple of months and, kind of be able to fight back from, the time that he maybe struggled throughout the course of the year and Hecklinski ended up passing him. But yeah, I mean, in other positions too. I mean, you talk about the offensive line. I think a lot of those positions are kind of stacked there, but you bring in some pretty productive transfers from the FCF ranks at wide receiver. You have position battle with LJ Phillips and Kamari Moulton at running back. Like I said, the offensive line, new faces, defensive line, a lot of new faces, linebacker, like can those guys, can those Eastern Iowa guys potentially pass up some of the guys that were, veterans last year that, necessarily weren't veterans, but there were older guys who, didn't have a lot of, experience, but still like, and then same with the secondary too. Like there are some pieces they had to fill there and transfers that you brought in and guys you got to replace and special teams also. So it's kind of just like, man, there's a lot of different guys and a lot of new guys stepping up at different positions. But I think you have to really be excited about kind of the young core that they have within this program. And I think, the offensive line, I think there's a chance that room could potentially be better than it was last year, I think. That's kind of tough to say considering they were Joe Moore Ward offensive line. But man, like they got a really lot of good pieces over there up front. But like I said, it's just so many unknowns and so many really intriguing position battles. That's going to make it really fascinating to see, kind of who emerges.
Yeah, you covered it very well in high school. These guys, the three linebackers you talk about, and Drew Weiskopf, Cam Buffington, and Preston Reese, and they were all great in high school and have had in their limited time playing at Iowa, they've done very well. And as you mentioned, the specialists, first time in a handful of years, kind of like the quarterback battle. Drew Stevens due to graduation, and then Reese Dakin because he transferred with a special teams coach when LeVar Woods left Iowa to go to Michigan State to join Pat Fitzgerald's coaching crew, and then you had Reese Dakin leave. So yeah, it's going to be some interesting, and then who's going to be the return specialist? And you and I talked a little bit about that a couple weeks ago, but a lot of positions up for grabs and some guys ready to are they ready, Sean, to take that move? And of course, the Hawkeye mantra has always been in football, next man up. So we're going to find that out big time this year, aren't we?
Yeah, no, it's going to be a really interesting spring. I mean, it's probably, like I said, it's probably one of the more biggest question mark springs that I've had like since covering the beat. I mean, there were a couple that were definitely really fascinating, but you kind of maybe knew who was going to step up and you kind of have an idea this year, but still like there's still some certain spots and still some certain pieces where you kind of like, I don't know, like that's just such an interesting offseason. I think it's going to, drive a lot more interest because that, like I said, I think a lot of people knew kind of what to expect coming into some of those years, but you brought in a lot of transfers. I mean, I know we talk about that Cade McNamara transfer class as kind of the first like introduction to Portal Kirk. This one's like even more, of like a Portal Kirk kind of class and, guys that, could maybe start, but also could really be more depth pieces this season too. And also have multiple years of eligibility remaining. So it's going to be really, really fun to see, kind of who emerges and who steps up. And that quarterback battle is going to be a lot of fun too.
Yeah. And John, great stuff from you today, as always. 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports, beat writer there, Sean Bock is, as well as a recruiting expert. And thanks again to my production partners at BettorEdge and BettorEdge.com, Greg Kieski and James Siles. Also want to remind you folks, next week, Adam Haluska. We're going to get a little bit more basketball-centric, similar to today, but almost focused on basketball specifically. Former Hawkeye basketball playing great Adam Haluska will join us next week. Really going to hone in on Hawkeyes getting ready for the men's basketball for the Big Ten tournament and see where the women sit after this week's Big Ten tournament. Sean, it is great talking to you. What a day it's been. Thank you for taking the time to join us for the whole show. Great to see you again. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, for having me. Should be a exciting next couple of weeks too.
Absolutely. Getting ready for March Madness. It is here. We are here March 2nd today and moving forward. So again, for Sean Bock and my friends at BettorEdge and BettorEdge.com, I'm Dave O'Hara with Hawkeye. That's all from us. Thanks to all of you.